the 6 wives of Henry VIII, Catherine Howard. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We continue our historical look at the wives of Henry VIII to make a determination as to what classification, foundation classification, that they belong to: empath, normal, narcissistic, or narcissist. With each of the wives, I've looked at a whole host of information to make a determination as to which foundation classification they belong to. And then, for ease of digesting the information through video, rather than go on a long haul through each and every piece that has been examined, saying could it be this or could it be that, I have essentially selected the chief and prominent examples to demonstrate what they belong to. So there is more evidence that supports it, but I've chosen not to include it all for reasons of brevity and accessibility. Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of King Henry VIII of England, remains one of the most enigmatic and tragic figures in Tudor history. Born around 1521 or 1522 into the influential Howard family, she ascended to the throne as Queen Consort in 1540 at a tender age, likely no older than 19, only to be executed for treason in 1542 after allegations of adultery shattered her brief reign. Naturally, adultery, if it occurred, is infidelity and is a narcissistic trait, which might tell us more about what she is. Unfortunately for Catherine Howard, her story is often reduced to scandal and sensuality, but a deeper examination demonstrates a rather complex individual who was shaped by neglect, ambition, and tossed around by the ruthless dynamics of the Tudor court. To assess Catherine, we draw on verified historical sources, including contemporary accounts like those from ambassadors Charles de Marillac and Eustace Chapuis, interrogation records from 1541, and modern scholarly analyses by historians such as Gareth Russell, Connor Byrne, and Lucy Worsley. These provide evidence of her behaviours, which we evaluate against my criteria for each foundation classification. Might she be an empath driven by deep emotional care but easily victimised? A normal with balanced self-regard? Narcissistic, embodying attention-seeking traits and selfishness without the full pathology? Or does she cross the line into narcissist? Catherine's early life was marked by instability, setting the stage for behaviours that reflect neither profound empathy nor necessarily ruthless self-interest. Born in Lambeth to Lord Edmund Howard and Joyce Culpeper, she was one of at least 10 siblings in a family plagued by financial woes. Her father, a gambler and ineffective courtier, frequently borrowed from relatives, including his brother Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk. After her mother's death around 1528, when Catherine was around 6 or 7, she was dispatched to the household of her step-grandmother, Agnes Tilney, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. This environment, being away from a paternal upbringing, potentially might have been viewed as one that was of a lack of control. Furthermore, the environment, housing numerous young wards in Chesworth House and later Norfolk House, was notoriously lax. Verified accounts from household servants, detailed in the 1541 interrogations, preserved in the state papers, describe a dormitory where girls shared beds, supervision was minimal, and this fostered an atmosphere of gossip, flirtation, and impropriety. A key behaviour here was Catherine's apparent passivity in the face of neglect. Were she an empath, she might actively seek to nurture others despite her own hardships, or utilise the hardships of others for manipulative purposes. But it would appear that Catherine adapted quietly. Historian Retha Warnick notes in her analysis that the Dowager Duchess provided little education or moral guidance, focusing instead on courtly manners. Catherine learned basic reading, writing, and music, but received no religious or ethical training, which contributed to a later impulsivity on her part. Modern interpretations, such as Lucy Worsley's Six Wives with Lucy Worsley of 2016, frame this as evidence of childhood trauma, positioning Catherine as a victim rather than an agent. This might mean that as a consequence of this childhood trauma, this further evidences a lack of control environment. Or, alternatively, it might be the case that she was shaped by that childhood trauma to cause her to seek out those individuals that were likely to cause a problem for her, seeking the storm of narcissism as an adult, perhaps being exposed to it as a child. Witnesses like Joan Bulmer testify that Catherine shared sweets and stories with dormitory mates, suggesting some mild prosocial behaviour. It demonstrates that there appeared to be some basic relational glue rather than necessarily deep emotional investment. There's no evidence to suggest that she exploited the friendships for gain. Her teenage years reveal behaviours often misinterpreted as promiscuity, but better understood as responses to exploitation. Around 1536, at age 13 or 14, she began lessons with Henry Mannocks, her music teacher, a man in his mid-20s. Verified from Mannocks' own confessions during the 1541 trials, their relationship involved fondling and intimate touching, but not full intercourse. Mannocks boasted to others, saying, "I've had her by the cunt, and I know it amongst 100, indicating his predatory intent towards her. Catherine later admitted during interrogations that she allowed these advances, but ended the liaison when it risked discovery, moving to a relationship with Francis Dereham in 1538. The fact that she was subjected to such behaviour and initially allowed it could possibly be seen as the behaviour of a somatic narcissist utilising her womanly wiles for the purposes of manipulation, or, alternatively, an already troubled victim who didn't know any better than to behave this way and therefore reverted to type. The fact that she brought the relationship to an end, despite his predatory behaviour when exposure was threatened, suggests a greater degree of resilience than reliance. Dereham, a gentleman pensioner in the Duchess's household, was older, late 20s, and more aggressive. They exchanged tokens, called each other husband and wife, and likely engaged in sexual relations, as Dereham confessed to carnal knowledge about Catherine. Catherine's letters and testimonies showed she viewed this as a serious attachment, but the Duchess discovered them in 1539 and beat Catherine, ending the affair. Modern scholars like Connor Byrne in Catherine Howard, A New History of 2014, argue this was grooming. Catherine, unsupervised and seeking affection in a neglectful home, was manipulated by older men. Worsley echoes this, describing her as an abused child, whose behaviour stemmed from trauma as opposed to innate hedonism. This demonstrates an emotional vulnerability, which could have been potentially exploited by narcissists replicating similar behaviours in her. It might also be the case that an empathic individual would be forgiving or even empathise with the abusers, but Catherine showed resentment. She rebuffed Mannocks, later telling him, "I'll never be naught with you." She didn't utilise the liaison for validation or advancement, but instead it would appear that she did have genuine affection, but was not so as enmeshed as to not see that there was a problem. There was emotional attachment and tearful partings, demonstrating an ability to form an emotional attachment with another individual. Her flirtatiousness might indicate attention-seeking, and therefore there's the possibility that the provision of empathy was conditional on personal gratification. She made impulsive decisions, but they weren't malicious. They were often balanced by regret also, as a consequence of her confessions. A notable example was when Dereham later blackmailed her as queen, demanding a court position. She appointed him secretary, quite possibly to silence him. This might be seen as a manipulative act on her part, and indeed would be most likely regarded as one. But was it driven by an innate need to manipulate for the purpose of control and fuel? Or was it more as a consequence of a response driven by fear? Probably the latter. By 1539, at age 17, Catherine joined the household of Anne of Cleves as a lady-in-waiting, arranged by her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, to advance Howard family interests. Once again, Catherine found herself the pawn of powerful men. Here, Catherine's behaviour shifted towards courtly charm. Ambassador Marillac described her as delightful and graceful, while Chapuis noted her vivaciousness captivated the ageing Henry VIII, then 49 years old and obese. Henry pursued her aggressively, gifting jewels and lands, and annulled his marriage to Anne on the 9th of July 1540, marrying Catherine on the 28th of July at Oatlands Palace. Might this be opportunism on the part of Catherine, utilising her attractiveness in order to captivate an older, more powerful man? Well, her role was more passive. Her family pressure propelled her. Verified letters show she accepted Henry's affections eagerly, but as a low-born noble with no dowry, refusal was impossible for her. Behaviours like lavish dressing, French gowns, jewels, suggest enjoyment of status, a narcissistic trait of vanity, and perhaps demonstrating some entitlement. However, she used her position empathetically, interceding for imprisoned poet Thomas Wyatt and Margaret Pole, pleading mercy in ways that Anne Boleyn previously had. Her pro-social activity aligns with the presence of emotional empathy, rather than the presentation of a facade or out-and-out self-interest. Psychological insights from Byrne suggest post-traumatic stress responses from adolescence made Catherine Howard seek validation through beauty and affection, as opposed to innate cold manipulation. As queen from 1540 to 1541, Catherine's behaviours blended youthful exuberance with recklessness. Henry doted on her, calling her his rose without a thorn, and she reciprocated with affection, nursing his ulcerous leg despite its foul odour. This might be viewed perhaps as an act requiring considerable empathy, but it's more likely as a consequence of simple duty towards her king. Court records show she organised entertainments, danced joyfully and spent extravagantly on progresses, like the 1541 Northern Tour, costing thousands. This, again, demonstrates a level of self-absorption and selfishness on her part. Her affair with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, introduces complexity. Beginning in spring 1541, facilitated by Jane Boleyn, it involves secret meetings. A verified love letter from Catherine reads, "It makes my heart die to think what fortune I have that I cannot always be in your company. Yours, as long as life endures, Catherine." The passionate language suggests some form of emotional attachment as opposed to necessarily narcissistic detachment. Culpeper confessed they discussed marriage post Henry's death, indicating fantasy over necessary calculation. The affair would most likely have been used for purposes of control or validation, were she a narcissist. Catherine's tearful interrogations show remorse. She said, "I have done very ill." This might be the presentation of empathy out of unmet needs, feeling guilt, her pleas for mercy for others, but not self-justification lean here. However, she did exhibit impulsivity, meeting during progresses despite the presence of spies, which hints perhaps also at not particularly being astute, and also narcissistic traits of selfishness, vanity, and pride, whereby she prioritised thrill over consequences. Appointing Derham as secretary, Derham demanded it, saying a queen should remember old friends. She complied, but warned him to behave. This has been interpreted as naivety rather than a mastery of blackmail. Arrested on the 12th of November 1541 after Archbishop Cranmer's letter detailing her past, Catherine's behaviours in captivity reveal further character. Initially hysterical, she confessed premarital affairs but denied adultery, claiming Derham had raped her, a possible trauma response. Imprisoned at Sion Abbey, she composed herself, requesting the block to practice her execution, showing stoic acceptance. Interrogations preserved in letters and papers of Henry VIII showed no manipulation on her part. She sought Henry's mercy, writing, "I, your Grace's most sorrowful and repentant subject." This remorse contrasts with a general lack of accountability, or a facade of showing supposed contrition. Looking at her verified behaviours, there was neglect, adaptation, groomed relationships, court charm, what appeared to be intercession with empathy, reckless affair, and remorseful end. Overall, there appears to be some instances of genuine affection, but we also have to take into account the naivety and immaturity of this young woman. She clearly was someone that was readily dazzled by wealth and beauty and the court that she was involved in. She did not have the inherent and instinctive ability to negotiate it in a way which would have preserved her. Instead, she was like a cork tossed around on the oceans. She was somewhat attention-seeking and impulsive. She did exhibit limited emotional empathy, but the overall impression one gains from her behaviours is of an individual who was, in a sense, a silly little girl that was more interested in what was in it for her, not to the extent of harming other people, but that she was inherently self-absorbed and self-focused, with selfishness and vanity and pride being prevalent. Not a bad person and easily manipulated by others, for she was able to have her head turned with the promise of matters improving for her. And ultimately, based on the information, the determination for her would be that she was narcissistic, but not a narcissist, with limited emotional empathy but at present, and a more inward-looking focus compared to the normal or the empath. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.